Every player is different. In his book, Designing Virtual Worlds, Dr. Richard Bartle said, "Virtual worlds are places where the imaginary meets the real, and we naturally seek stability. We can't be completely separated from reality, so we need to find the right amounts of real and virtual for the mix that balances us." Clearly, because we are different from each other, this mix has different flavors. But what does that have to do with this video? Creating a well-designed game is complicated. As a beginning step, designers must find answers to certain questions, such as how can I make the player's experience distinct and memorable? And what should I learn about my potential players? You get it, there is a lot to consider. But perhaps most essential are the psychological needs of your players, how to motivate them, and the reasoning behind their actions.
And you choose mercy. Extraordinary.
So, how can a designer achieve this if everyone is different? Well, we are not all that different, and today I'll show you some of the ways you can think of the psyche of your players and their needs. Freud would have a blast. But first, how do we usually get people to do something? Players need a certain type of fuel for a slightly more special engine, willingness to play. And that fuel is no other than motivation, a crucial part of any game. It is what drives a player to, well, play. It's what makes people finish and squeeze every last drop of engagement from games. That happens as long as you can frequently incentivize coming back to the game, even after finishing the main storyline, after reaching a certain score, or after getting all the achievements. Designers usually do this through something we have borrowed from behavioral psychology: intrinsic and extrinsic rewards. Consequently, there are two kinds of motivation. Intrinsic, when we are doing an enjoyable or meaningful activity purely for its own sake, and extrinsic, which is when we accomplish a task and expect a reward. So, a game like Spelunky is heavily inclined towards intrinsic motivation, because you play to get better and farther every run, which is the whole point of the game. While in competitive games, like Counter-Strike, you might focus on getting a better rank, which is an extrinsic reward, or in other words, a tangible way of measuring your performance. So, in November 1989, a debate started in the community of a certain multi-user dungeon game. It was sparked by their curiosity of knowing what players are looking for in a multi-user dungeon. By May next year, hundreds of people had expressed their opinions. Dr. Richard Bartle, who at that time was the game's senior administrator, found that people are generally looking for 4 components. And in 1996, Bartle published a paper which classified players in 4 major groups: achievers, explorers, socializers, and killers. Achievers are the type of people that care about tangible methods of measuring their progress and skill, like getting better equipment, keeping track of their score, or receiving all the in-game achievements. In turn, they are mostly extrinsically motivated and tend to focus on rewards rather than their experience. A real bummer. Explorers like to discover everything about the game, to find out new places, and to get immersed into their surrounding space and atmosphere. They are intrinsically motivated, so they will remember their adventure. Some people prefer to use the game for social gatherings and interacting with others. They use the game as a reason to meet other players, and this social interaction can be a good enough reward for them. Other people find their fun in competing with others, discussing new tactics, and finding ways of constantly beating their opponents, which motivates them and brings them satisfaction. And here is what's interesting. No one fits into one single category. The Bartle quotient, which is the result of the Bartle test of gamer psychology, sums up to 200%, and no category can go above 100%. So, for instance, you might be a 67% explorer dominantly, and then, in decreasing order, a socializer, a killer, and finally, an achiever, like I am. But here's the catch. In this case, Socializing, killing, and achieving are only methods of enhancing exploring and ways of discovering new ideas. This was one of the first leaps in player motivation. It proved to be a stepping stone in understanding player psychology. It gained popularity and later became known as Bartle's taxonomy of player types. Though, here are a couple of caveats. The test used to determine the Bartle quotient has a binary nature, where you can only be part of one group. Would you rather have a way of socializing with your friends, or real estate worth millions of in-game currency? That's a weird way of putting it. Although these two options aren't normally mutually exclusive, the test was designed for only one of them. But don't judge Bartle for that, he's not the one who created the test. Secondly, Bartle's classification is largely restrictive, because it was originally used to describe players of MMOs and multi-user dungeons. Consequently, designers tend to abuse it as a one-size-fits-all tool. As Bartle said,
"It's like having a room with a door that's only this high, and anybody trying to get in can't get in unless they're smaller than this. And when they get in, you say, hey, we've got a room of short people."
But in 2005, Nick E., an American social scientist, noticed a number of flaws with Bartle's theory, such as competing against others may be independent of wanting to chat and socialize. And so, he decided to make his own research to understand what motivates players. After gathering the data, he noticed similar patterns and grouped them into three main components: achievement, social, and immersion. Achievement has three meanings: reaching goals and making progress in the game, understanding how the game works and its mechanics, and competing against others and comparing scores. The social component means being satisfied by collaborating with others, by forming deep and meaningful relationships with them, and obviously, by meeting, socializing, and chatting with other players. Immersion means enjoying discovering the in-game world. It means fancying role-playing and creating your own character. But it also means using the game as a way to escape real life with all its problems. And everyone leans, more or less, towards any of these three components. So you may score higher on achievement and immersion, and lower on social. This was a better and more complete foundation back then. But E himself noted that the factor analytic approach is, of course, not without its limitations. In 1985, Richard Ryan and Edward Deci, two American psychologists, brought a new hypothesis in the world of motivation: the self-determination theory, or SDT for short. Then, in 2000, they decided to take a better look at intrinsic and extrinsic rewards and how they alter motivation. Ryan and Deci theorized that people are naturally inclined towards intrinsically motivated activities, and that extrinsic rewards decrease intrinsic motivation to accomplish tasks. They also suggested three basic psychological needs for well-being and psychological growth: autonomy, which is when you do a task for your own benefit; competence, when you are sufficiently challenged; and relatedness, when you interact with others. So, when you are feeling in control, feeling skillful, and perhaps able to connect with others, growth will be at its maximum. Anyway, how does that all link to this video? In 2006, interestingly enough, Ryan decided to study player motivation precisely in correlation with SDT. So, together with Scott Rigby and Andrew Shibilsky, he focused on the three basic psychological needs within gaming environments and their connection to fun and wellness. So, satisfying autonomy means giving players agency, or in other words, letting players take control. This can be done in varyingly inventive ways, by letting players complete a task in their own style, like Hitman does, by giving them meaningful choices that affect the story, like in The Witcher, or even allowing players to personalize their in-game characters on a level similar to Codeveins. On the other hand, controlling or restricting players, having a limited number of choices, or even having multiple meaningless choices has the opposite effect. However, you can get away with having limited options if players resonate with at least one of those choices. Competence means designing fitting tests and clever conundrums that challenge the player's skill in a way that's optimally balanced, so that it's not too easy but not too hard either. It's unequivocally important to raise the challenge as the game progresses, but to satisfy competence, you need to let the player know of their incredible performance. You can leave them feedback through an intrinsic reward, say by unlocking a new mechanic, or, as long as it's unexpected, a completely safe extrinsic one, like extra points or an achievement. Whichever way you choose, remember, it's essential to give the player feedback. And finally, relatedness can be satisfied by connecting with others and belonging to communities or factions. But don't fall into a trap by thinking that this applies exclusively to multiplayer games. Concerned Ape created a whole in-game community with cute, pixelated villagers that you belong to, and the Nemesis system procedurally generates orcs with whom you form ally-enemy relationships. And there are also games like The Sims that have huge communities that create content for the game. This brings us back to Ryan and the 2006 research paper. 4 elaborate studies later, he, along with the others, reached a pretty interesting conclusion. Autonomy and competence are strongly connected to the player's mood and self-esteem. So, when players felt in charge and efficient, they proved to be more motivated and happier in the short term. This, in turn, increased the overall chances of players returning to the game. Here is one last caveat. Intrinsic rewards are arguably the better option over extrinsic ones, because once you run out of extrinsic bonuses, intrinsic motivation can still push the player forward. Though that's not to say external rewards are bad. If cleverly used and well timed, they can be handy in captivating players early on and getting them to enjoy the game intrinsically. These are some of the ways you can think of the psychological needs of your players. It goes without saying that I did not exhaustively cover this vast topic. There is a lot more to consider in the psychology of your players. So, if you want to learn more, I left some nifty links in the video's description, as a gift for staying until the end. Alas, I'm sure what I talked about in this video will come in handy in your designer toolset. If you found this video interesting, please leave a like, and to keep up on future uploads, subscribe. Or support me directly like these awesome patrons: Avirama FM, Badr Al-Kahtani, Giovanni Pena, Golden Glowmaster, Realitats Verlast, and Waifu is Life. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers!